Snow had fallen through the night, thick as memory, soft as morning, and by morning the town of Whitford lay wrapped in a white hush. The buildings stood like forgotten tombstones, their chimneys trailing smoke into a pewter sky. At the edge of Main Street, a lone figure rode out of the whiteness, a silhouette too still, too sorrowful for just another passing stranger. The horse was exhausted, its ribs shivering beneath a torn wool blanket. Upon the man's chest, wrapped in a worn deerskin sling, was a bundle that made no sound at all. He dismounted in front of the shuttered store, his boots crunching on frost-bitten wood. His coat was Apache cut, long fringe hanging like icicles, and his black hair was bound with rawhide, matted from wind and sorrow. He had no hat, just a face drawn with hunger and sleeplessness, a face that had forgotten how to ask without shame. The door to the apothecary was locked. He knocked once, twice, then turned to the tailor's. A child inside peeked from behind curtain, then vanished as the door bolted shut. He went on. The blacksmith looked out, saw him, and went back to hammering. The preacher's wife crossed the street to avoid him. Each time he knocked, each time he begged softly for milk, they offered the same reply in different ways. Not for you. From the second-story window above the feed store, Eliza Whitlock watched the man sway. She had been tending to the fire, setting out bread to rise, when she noticed the trail of hoof prints behind him, crooked, tired, ending at each slammed door. He reached the watering trough, cracked over with ice, and stopped. The baby in his sling gave a small cry, weak as candlelight in wind. That was the sound that broke her. Eliza pulled on her coat, brown wool, mended a dozen times, and wrapped the shawl tight across her chest. As she stepped onto the street, the world grew quieter. People watched from windows. A few came onto porches, waiting, whispering. The man didn't look at her when she approached. "Sir," she said gently, "how old's the child?" His eyes were dark, like cooled embers. He answered with a voice full of gravel and desert. 3 days. My wife," he paused. "She didn't stay." Eliza looked down at the baby's face, mottled red from cold, mouth open in a silent wail. Its eyes fluttered beneath lashes damp with snowmelt. "There ain't no goats nursing in this town," she murmured mostly to herself. "No cows in milk till spring. No nursemaids neither." He didn't reply. He just waited, like a man used to hoping without expecting. "I have a back room. It's warm," she said slowly, feeling the heat of the town's judgment crackling behind her like lightning. "I'm not asking for you," he said quietly. "Only for her." She looked down at the tiny face, then at the people watching, then back at the man. His boots were cracked, soaked through. He hadn't brought weapons. Just that baby, and that look in his eyes like all the world had already said no. Eliza made her choice. "This way," she said and turned. She led him behind her building, through a side gate, into the warmth of her wood-stacked barn. There, among straw and soft lamp glow, she cleared a place on the bench beside the stove. He sat without speaking, unwrapping the baby with reverence. Eliza's hands shook slightly as she unfastened the front of her blouse. It had been years since she'd held a child like this. Years since she'd let someone need her. The baby latched with an urgency that brought tears to her eyes. She'd blinked them back and looked across at the man, who had turned away, shoulders tight, as though ashamed to witness what had saved his child. The snow outside thickened. The world closed in quieter still. "What's her name?" Eliza asked softly. He paused. "Doe. Like the deer." "She came in the woods. Fast. Quiet. And her mama was gone before I could stop the bleeding." Eliza let her fingers rest against the baby's warm cheek. "She's lucky you didn't stop trying." The man gave no answer, but his jaw shifted. His knuckles whitened. It was the first sign she saw that he might break. "I'm Eliza," she said. He nodded. "Clay." They sat in silence as the baby fed, then dozed, her tiny breath fogging the space between them like smoke from an ember not yet gone out. Eliza wrapped the child carefully and handed her back. She did not miss the way Clay's hands trembled when he took her. Snow melted down his neck and didn't even make him flinch. "I'll bring you some bread and broth," she said. "You'll stay here tonight. Barn's warmer than the road." "I've stayed colder." "I don't doubt it," she said, her voice quiet, steady. "But not with a child." He met her eyes for the first time then, really met them. And in that moment, she saw no wildness, no threat. Only a man too tired to beg again, and too proud to speak of it. By the time she returned with food, the baby was swaddled and sleeping, and Clay sat with his back to the fire, eyes closed but not asleep. She placed the tray down. He murmured thanks she almost didn't hear. As she stepped out into the snow again, a hush fell around her. Mrs. Harker stood by the well, arms crossed, mouth drawn tight like she'd bitten into something bitter. Eliza didn't flinch, just walked past, her boots crunching softly as if the snow had decided she wasn't worth a louder judgment. Behind her, someone muttered, "She'll never find a man now." Eliza smiled faintly. She hadn't been looking. Inside the barn, Clay hummed low under his breath, a lullaby in a language Eliza didn't know. She listened from outside the door, heart quiet and full. It wasn't beauty or belonging she felt. Not yet. But something warmer than pity, deeper than curiosity. She looked up at the sky. Snow still falling. And somewhere inside the hush of it all, Eliza understood that she had crossed a line, one the town had drawn long ago between what a woman should do and what a soul must do to remain whole. She crossed it anyway, and when the baby stirred in the night, hungry again, Eliza went to her. By morning, the frost on Eliza's porch railings had thickened into silver lace, and the gossip had bloomed like wildfires in a dry wind. Word had spread faster than reason. Eliza Whitlock let an Apache sleep in her barn and nursed his baby herself. Some said it happened under the Lord's eye. Others claimed it happened under a curse. Eliza didn't argue either version. She moved through her chores as always, splitting kindling, milking her old stubborn cow who hadn't offered milk in months but now gave enough to wet a rag. She washed linens in silence, kept the fire steady, and made stew for 3, though Clay only ever took half a bowl and gave the rest to the baby's needs. He hadn't come into the house, not even once. Not for warmth, not for bread. He stayed in the barn like a man who'd made peace with exile. But the baby had changed that space. Her tiny breath, her faint cries, made it less like a barn and more like a cradle of second chances. Mrs. Harker was the first to knock, sharp and fast, like she meant to drive her fists through the door. Eliza opened it with her apron still damp from laundry, hair unpinned and loose around her shoulders. That in itself was enough to earn a frown. "You've shamed every decent woman in this town," Tansy Harker hissed, wasting no time on pleasantries. Her hands were gloved even in spring's breath, white knuckles gripping a basket untouched by hospitality. "Letting a savage stay here. Filthy. Feeding a child like that. People will talk." "They already are," Eliza replied evenly, voice quiet as still water. "So you needn't waste more breath helping them. It's indecent. You're not married. You're not anything but a barren spinster." "Then why do you care what I do?" The question wasn't cruel. It was simply said. Tansy stepped back, wounded more by Eliza's calm than any heat could have given. "God sees everything." "So does that child," Eliza said and closed the door. Later, she found Clay fixing the rear fence where wind had knocked down 2 slats. He didn't ask her about the visitor. Didn't speak unless spoken to, though his actions spoke plenty. He'd already stacked new wood beside the door. He kept the fire going when she was too tired to remember. He rose before her, laid out water for the kettle, carried silence like a bomb. That evening, as Eliza held the baby on her lap, gently rocking and humming something soft she barely remembered learning, she thought of her sister's child, Josephine. Just a slip of a thing. Born sick, fed with trembling hands, and lost within a season. The ache had never left, just dulled like a bruise under years. She looked down at Doe. Warm now. Soothed. Wrapped in one of Eliza's old cotton petticoats. She had wide eyes, unblinking, like she hadn't yet decided whether the world was cruel or kind. Clay watched from a stool near the barn wall, hands still stained with pine resin. Eliza had come to read his silences the way one might read sky before a storm. Gentle tension, heavy stillness, something rising. "She reminds me of someone," Eliza said softly. He didn't ask who. Didn't pry. He simply nodded, as if he too carried ghosts in his pocket. "Town wants you gone," she added after a moment. "They'd rather pretend you never came through." "I can leave," he said. "You won't. I will not put you in danger." She shook her head. "It's not danger. It's discomfort. They don't burn witches anymore. Just wear them down till they disappear." He looked at her then, really looked. She felt it like a breath against the skin. A recognition or maybe a prayer. That night, Pastor Klein came. He was old and worn thin by sorrow and sermons, but his voice still held the gentleness of a man who remembered the names of lost children. He stood by her front gate, hat in hand. "I won't stay long," he said. "Just wanted to see how the little one fared. She's strong. Hungry." He looked out toward the barn. "And him. Quiet. Kind." He nodded. "Folks don't like quiet men. They fill in the silence with fear. You here to convince me to send him on?" "No," he said simply. "I'm here to remind you that God ain't a committee." She smiled faintly. "Amen to that." The next day, Clay left a small carving by the door, a tiny horse, smooth and rounded at the edges. Not beautiful, but something more honest. He didn't mention it. Neither did she. But she kept it on her windowsill. Days passed. The baby's cheeks turned pink with health. Her eyes followed Eliza now, clung to her voice like it was an anchor in a shifting sea. Eliza found herself humming more, speaking softly even when alone. The house, long silent, had found a new language in coos and whispers. But the town did not forget. She was refused at the general store. Refused by Mrs. Madigan's sewing circle. She noticed her mail came late. Her firewood was knocked over one morning, scattered. Someone left a note on her doorstep, 2 words scratched cruelly in red coal, "Apache whore." She burned it in the stove, without a word. Still, each evening, she walked to the barn, held the child, let her nurse. Clay never asked her to. She never asked why he stayed. Some things were understood in silence. One night, as the snow melted into early thaw and the wind smelled of cedar and new mud, Eliza sat beside the fire inside the barn. Clay sat near the doorway, watching the last of the sunlight spill like honey through the rafters. "She doesn't cry much anymore," Eliza said. "She knows she's safe." Eliza looked up. "She's not the only one." That silence after wasn't awkward. It was full. Full of things neither had names for yet. Full of shared exile and quiet rebuilding. Later, Eliza lay awake beneath a quilt, the baby's lullaby still in her head, her breast aching and empty now, but content. She heard the barn door creak gently in the wind. Heard Clay murmuring words in a language she would never speak, but somehow understood. She turned on her side, hand resting where the baby usually lay during nursing, and exhaled long. She was alone, yes, but she had not vanished. Not yet. And in a town that tried to shame her into silence, she had fed a child instead. Some days, that was all it took to keep a soul alive. The scent of smoke had changed. It no longer whispered of loneliness or hollow hearths. It clung now to bread rising in the oven, to wood split before sunrise, to warmth shared without words. In Eliza's world, once quiet as an unused parlor, there were now sounds of life, the faint rustle of baby blankets, the slow creak of a cradle built with calloused hands, and the muted thud of an axe against cedar. Clay Redmoon worked without needing to be asked. Each morning he rose before the sky pinked and split kindling like it was penance. He spoke seldom, though his actions were fluent. He cleared snow from her steps, tied up the broken gate latch, and left snares near the tree line that brought in rabbits twice a week. He didn't touch the house, didn't cross her threshold. But he never wandered far. Not from her. Not from the baby. The town still stared. Whispers trailed Eliza through every dusty street like shadows. Women at the pump fell silent when she approached. Children called her wild woman and dared each other to run past her gate. Someone scratched a curse into her outhouse door. But she did not bend. She held baby doe closer to her chest, sang lullabies older than her bitterness, and pressed on. When the world turns against a woman, she learns to be her own fire. One morning, with snow melting in rivulets down the hillsides, Sheriff Darnell rode up on a dun-colored gelding. He didn't tie off, just let the horse drink from the trough while he watched Clay chopping wood like a man driven by ghosts. Eliza stood on the porch, drying her hands on her apron, eyes narrowed against the pale sun. "Just checking in," the sheriff said mildly. "Town's buzzing again." "When is it not?" Eliza replied. "They're worried he'll stay," he said, nodding toward Clay. "Worried he'll forget he ain't welcome." "He hasn't asked to be," she said. "He's just trying to keep his child alive." The sheriff shifted in the saddle. "I know that, but some of the folks here, folks with power, are starting to itch. Say you're set tin, a bad example." Eliza smiled, but didn't reach her eyes. "Then let them do better." "She yours now?" he asked quietly after a pause. "The child." "She's mine when she's hungry," Eliza answered. And that's enough for me. The sheriff nodded once and tipped his hat. You always were the hard kind. After he left, Clay walked up to the porch and handed her a split log for the stack. He'll be back. She nodded. Yes, but so will I. That evening, Baby Doe was restless. She refused to sleep, twisting in Eliza's arms, fussing in fits. Clay came to the door when the crying peaked. He didn't speak, just lifted his hands gently. Eliza, weary and aching, nodded. He took the baby as though she were made of river mist. He held her high against his chest, swaying in small, rhythmic steps, and began to hum in a low voice, a song shaped like the wind through cottonwoods. It was a lullaby in Apache, melodic and mournful. Eliza watched from the doorway, one hand against the lintel. The snow moon spilled through the rafters above, painting them both in silver blue. For a moment the world slowed, not in peace, but in stillness, like even the sorrow was pausing to listen. She likes you, Eliza said softly. I think she misses the sound, Clay murmured. My wife sang always. Eliza stepped into the barn and leaned against the stall wall. What was her name? Star in Autumn. That's beautiful. He nodded, eyes fixed on the baby's settling breath. She died giving this one life. We buried her by the canyon's edge. I carried Doe 2 days before I found a trail to follow. And then I found your town. Eliza folded her arms tight against herself. I lost someone too. A child. Not mine exactly. My sister's. But she nursed at me for 2 months. Sickly from the start. Couldn't keep anything down. And then she stopped crying one morning. Her voice caught like a hinge on rust. That silence, it never left. He looked at her now, really looked. Not with desire, but with understanding. And yet you fed mine. Eliza didn't answer. She didn't have to. The baby sighed and stilled, her fingers curled into the collar of Clay's coat. He handed her back like passing something sacred. Back in the house, Eliza placed the child gently into the cradle, tucking a shawl around her. Clay stayed near the threshold, not crossing in, yet not fully out either. Something unspoken sat in the air between them. Respect. Loneliness. Something waiting. She offered him a biscuit, hot from a fire. He took it without touching her fingers, but his hand brushed the doorframe and lingered there, like a man learning what home might feel like. That night, Eliza lay awake, listening to the barn's quiet creak in the wind. She heard no cries, no footsteps, just the occasional pop of wood burning down into memory. She didn't feel fear. Not anymore. The town could whisper. Let them. The child had begun to smile. And sometimes when Eliza thought no one watched, she smiled back. The wind shifted the night the fever came. It howled over the hills like something wounded, carrying the scent of thaw and sickness. The baby's skin turned hot as embers, her cries thin and gasping, breath stuttering like a flame gone low. Eliza pressed a damp cloth to Doe's brow, her own hands trembling. The child's tiny body arched and curled, cheeks red and eyes glassy. Her mouth searched for milk, but wouldn't stay latched, and when she did manage to feed, she coughed and whimpered like it hurt her. Clay stood at the doorframe, jaw clenched, fingers fisting and releasing, as though trying to shape his helplessness into something useful. She needs Willow, Eliza whispered, smoothing the child's hair back. Bark syrup, or she won't sleep. Fever's too high. Store won't give it, Clay said. Not for her. Eliza didn't argue. She knew the truth in that. Ruth Templeton has some. Keeps it for her grandchildren, she said, already wrapping the child tighter, swaddling her against her chest. But it's 10 miles north. Clay turned without a word. When he came back from the barn, his horse was saddled, his coat fastened, and his rifle strapped behind him. I'm going, she said. His brow furrowed, and for the first time, anger flickered in his voice. You don't ride for me. I ride for her, Eliza said, stepping past him. You've done enough carrying. They rode through wind that bit the skin raw, snow hissing beneath hooves, the trees slicked with frost and leaning like quiet watchers. The baby whimpered against Eliza's chest, her breath warm through the shawl but shallow, a reminder that every minute mattered. They reached Ruth's just as the sun began to fade. Ruth hesitated when she opened the door, her eyes going wide at the sight of Clay's face. But then she looked down at the child, and something softened. She handed over the syrup without a price. I'll say I never saw you, she murmured. Not because I'm ashamed. Just tired of explaining mercy. Eliza nodded her thanks and turned the horse back toward the darkening hills. When they reached her home again, the air felt wrong, still but charged. The barn doors swung open, not wide, but enough. The scent of smoke lingered like a warning. Eliza slipped from her saddle, clutching the baby tight. Clay moved faster, rifle drawn, scanning the shadows. The barn's side wall was blackened, scorched. Straw still smoked. Someone had said it. "Damn fools tried to burn us out," Clay growled, his voice low, guttural. She could have been in there. Eliza walked to the back fence, where fresh letters had been scrawled in coal across the white wood. Whore's price. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, the baby pressed to her chest, and breathed slowly until the trembling in her legs passed. Clay stood beside her. "You should leave. Go where it's safe. This is my home. They'll come again." "Then let them," she said, her voice steady as hammerfall. "But they'll find I don't burn so easy." He looked at her then, fully, his eyes not angry anymore but awed. A soft kind of awe, the kind you feel staring at fire that warms without destroying. Sheriff Darnell arrived at dawn. He saw the blackened wall, the scrawled hate, the ashes still warm. "I can't prove who did it," he said quietly. "But I got names in my head. Problem is, the law here doesn't move for women like you. Or men like him." "Then what's it for?" Eliza asked. The sheriff didn't answer. He just tipped his hat and rode off looking older than when he'd come. That night, Clay hammered fresh boards into the barn wall. Eliza made tea with the willow syrup, spooning it slowly into the baby's mouth as she whimpered in sleep. Her fever had started to break, but left her limp, sweating, her breath still too shallow for comfort. When Clay came in from the cold, he looked at the house for a long time. "You've never stepped inside," Eliza said, watching him through the window. "It's not my place." "It is now." He crossed the threshold like a man stepping into church, head low, boots careful on the wood. She handed him a mug of tea, their fingers brushing. He took it silently, then sat near the fire, his eyes catching on the cradle he'd carved. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The air was heavy with all that had been lost and all that remained, balancing like flame on a wick. The baby whimpered once more, then sighed, and went still, breath steady at last. Clay closed his eyes and whispered something soft in Apache. A prayer. A thank you. A name. Eliza didn't know, but she felt it in her chest like a bell rung low. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and unhurried. Inside, for the first time, they were three, and none of them were alone. The baby's fever broke on the third morning. Eliza woke to quiet, not silence from stillness, but the soft, regular breath of a child asleep and healing. She sat for a long moment on the edge of the bed, watching Doe's chest rise and fall beneath the patchwork quilt, her small fist curled like a promise beside her cheek. Clay had fallen asleep in the chair by the hearth, his legs stretched long, boots still muddy. He hadn't intended to stay, Eliza knew, but exhaustion had taken him. In sleep, his face was younger. Not softer, but less guarded. The war beneath his skin was quiet for now. Eliza moved gently, set a kettle on, and stirred the fire to life. The small clink of iron on brick woke Clay. He straightened, blinking slow, then looked to the cradle. "She's better," she said. He nodded once, rubbing a hand down his face. "She slept through the night." "You did too." "I shouldn't have." "You should have," she said. "You needed it." A silence grew between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It hummed like something being woven, thread by thread, each gesture a stitch pulling them closer, whether they meant it to or not. Clay stood, walked to the cradle, and knelt beside it. He touched the baby's cheek, reverent, then rose and went to the door. "I'll finish the fence today," he said. Eliza nodded, but when he opened the door, she stopped him with one question. "Will you still leave when the snow melts?" He didn't turn. "You think I should?" "I don't think anything," she said quietly. "But I feel it." Clay stepped out into the light without answering. That day passed with an odd stillness. The town remained hushed, perhaps shamed by the fire they'd watched, but not stopped. Or perhaps waiting to see what Eliza would do, whether she'd cower, pack up, disappear. But she did none of those things. Instead, she went into town, baby swaddled against her chest, back straight. The church bell rang as she walked through the square. Conversations paused. Doors cracked open, eyes peered out. The same eyes that once looked through her now couldn't look away. Mrs. Tansy Harker stepped out of the general store, lips thin and painted in judgment. Her gaze flicked to the child, then to Eliza's face. "You're still feeding it?" she asked, as if it were a disease. Eliza didn't stop walking. "Her." "What?" "Her," she repeated. "Her name is Doe. She's not yours." Eliza turned then, slowly, and let the words fall like stones into still water. "She is now." Gasps fluttered around them like startled birds. But Eliza didn't shrink. "Maybe I'll never be respectable again," she said, looking at the watching faces, letting them feel the weight of their silence, their closed doors, their cold hearts. "But I'll be proud. I'll be proud every time she opens her eyes and sees me instead of the emptiness she was left with." Mrs. Harker scoffed. "He'll leave you. You know that." "I do," Eliza said, "but I won't leave her." And she walked on past the sheriff who watched from his stoop, past the preacher who simply nodded once, slow and solemn. That night, when she returned home, Clay was waiting near the porch. He looked like he'd been standing there a while, the setting sun casting his figure long against the dust. He held something in his hands, a cradle, carved and stained, delicate but sturdy. The corners were smooth, the legs arched just slightly to rock. Along the edge, he'd burned a name, Doe. "I was going to leave it here," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Didn't want to presume." Eliza stepped forward, brushing the wood with her fingertips. "You made this." "I wanted her to sleep in something made with care." She looked up at him, her voice steadier than she felt. "She already does." He swallowed hard, his throat moving like he was keeping back more than words. "I thought I came here to beg for milk," he said. "But you gave her more than that. You gave her," he faltered. "You gave her a mother. And you gave her her father." He nodded once. "Then maybe it's time I give her something else." Eliza waited, the wind tugging at her hem, her heart trembling. "My tribe won't welcome me back," he said finally. "Not with her. Not after leaving. And Whitford may never truly welcome you." "I don't need the town," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "Just a roof. Just a place where she grows with dignity and kindness." And his voice dropped. "And you." She didn't speak. She just stepped forward and placed her hand over his where it held the edge of a cradle. They stood like that, joined not by declarations, but by decision. Later, at Sunday gathering, the three of them arrived together. Clay wore a clean shirt, his braid tied with a thin strip of red fabric. Eliza held Doe in her arms, wrapped in the same shawl she had worn the night she first fed her. The church fell quiet. Pastor Klein waited until they reached the last pew, then began the hymn. Not a word of welcome, not a word of protest. But during the prayer, someone left a fresh loaf on their bench. And after the service, an old man tipped his hat to Clay. A young girl reached out to touch the baby's hand. And Mrs. Madigan, whose spine was more iron than bone, looked Eliza in the eye and said only, "Strong name that." That night, Clay sat by the fire, the baby asleep beside him. Eliza sat across, holding her sewing but not working it, watching the light flicker against his face. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, settled. He looked over at her and said, "You saved her." "She saved me first," she replied. Outside, the land lay quiet. No more whispers. No more smoke. Just stars above, blinking slow. And beneath them, in a cradle built with sorrow and love, a child dreamed warm and safe in the arms of the mother she never had until now. Some families are chosen, some are forged, and some are simply found. And when fire comes, when judgment falls, it is not blood that makes you stay. It is love, plain and unashamed.